Hello, welcome. This is Parker Thomas Brisebois, first of his name, and you are watching The Iridescent. Kind of going to be one of those days where I go over a Uber headline, like a societal thing that's just sort of weighing on a lot of us, or maybe not a lot of us. Maybe it's just me and other sane people or semi-sane people. But the themes of what I want to talk about today are some fantasies, specifically, that inform our narrative of what's going on in America, what has been going on in America, and how we should all be acting in light of these fantasies. How do our romantic notions of the course of history inform how we act within it and how we treat one another and look at one another and respond to one another? I want to start with art as usual, but today we're kind of going into the ongoing expansion. This will be the first one in expanding your definition of art, right? Art is when you just look at something a little differently than what it is actually is, right? So if any of you are familiar with the early 20th century sculpture known as the Fountain, you should look it up. All the Fountain was a urinal flipped on its head, or maybe not even that, but it basically just got a label calling it Fountain, and all it was a urinal, and they put it in an art installation, and it was considered art. And the only reason it was considered art is because it was put there and presented as art. So, all that being said, this is not art. This is not art. This is an element of culture that, in my opinion, encourages and facilitates people's ability to look at things differently in their mind's eye. What is it, you might ask? Well, some of my viewers are going to look at this thing and they're going to know immediately what it is, and they're going to roll their fucking eyes. This is the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide for the world's greatest role-playing game. You guessed it, Dungeons and Dragons. It does have cool art on it too, though. I was used to kind of reflect as a kid about, because I collected like Yu-Gi-Oh cards and Magic cards and all kinds of stuff with really cool fantasy art on it that I always thought of this is incredibly high detail. This is high quality. Why isn't this in the Louvre with Mona Lisa, I mean, look at that. That's some kind of crazy lich wizard thing. Very detailed, very grimdark looking, and he's got some kind of undead champion there. That's very cool. That's very detailed, You don't see that in the Mona Lisa. But then I got learned and realized it's because that's probably digitally produced, and all they had was like paste and oil, or I don't know, stuff made from like sweat or rubbing plants together. I don't know. It was way harder to do back then, and obviously that's why that's cool. But anyways, so this is a book for the world's greatest role-playing game, Dungeons and Dragons. And I want to make a case to you today for why you should play D&D or a game like it at least twice. And here's why. First of all, Dungeons & Dragons, for those of you who aren't familiar with how it works, is a game in which you undertake the persona, you play the role, right, because it's a role-playing game, of a fantasy hero or heroine or non-gender binary heroic person. Maybe you're a half-dragon thing, maybe you're half angelic, half demonic, whatever, and you have magical powers, or you have superhuman strength, or the ability to play music that can bend the minds of other characters in this fantasy world. Anyways, you go into somebody else's shoes, big time. Not just somebody else's shoes, but a larger-than-life figure who can do things that you couldn't possibly imagine doing because there's magic and stuff, so obviously you can't do that in real life. So that's what D&D is for you plebes who don't know what it is or still think it's some kind of devil worship medium. But my case for why you should play it, because that sounds really fucking nerdy, right? Like, you got to be into elves and dragons and shit if you want to do that. No, my case is that everybody should do it, because I find I've played a fair amount of D&D. I'm a dungeon master in several groups, so I facilitate the games for people. And what's really stuck with me recently is playing with people I never would have pegged for the types of nerds who would play D&D, getting into it, learning about it, and getting a lot out of it. And I think the core of that is the ability to, in a comfortable setting, in a place where you're surrounded by friends, in the format of a game, you can step out of yourself and enter into a new persona, which might seem like not that big a deal, but that's something that I don't think in the modern day people are very well practiced doing. You might argue, well, we play video games all the time. I play RPG games. I play shooters where I play some badass Marine that I could never aspire to be in real life. That's different. In D&D, you're face to face, or Zoom to Zoom in this age of COVID, with a group of people who you probably know, maybe you don't know so well, and you have to access a level of vulnerability in kind of awkwardly, at first, entering into a new persona and performing that for other people. And that's easier said than done for a lot of people. It is very clunky to roleplay. People don't know how to do it. They might not realize how tripped up they get on their own ego in their day-to-day, but when they're playing D&D for the first time, I promise you, people get acquainted with how entangled they are with their ego because they keep interjecting elements of their own biases into the experience, which makes sense. I mean, you can't not be you while you're doing it, but the whole point of the game is to try to do that as little as possible. I'm no longer Parker, I'm Kagamath when I'm playing with a certain group who's like a big, gnarly barbarian who is a religious zealot and total suicidal maniac, right? That's not me in real life, but I do everything in my power to fill those shoes, and it's a lot of fun for me. And I think on a certain level, it gives me a little bit of lightweight weightlifting in perspective shifting, and I really do. And I think that happens for a lot of people. And the reason I say play it twice is because the first time you're going to play it, and most people, the first time they play a character that's very much just like themselves transposed into a fantasy world. And they bring all their biases and their hang-ups and stuff. They want to do things that are cool, but also like cool in the metrics of the room, right? They don't do anything outlandish or amazing or experimental from a character perspective. They sort of do the shit that makes sense or that meshes or like allows them to further fit in with the group, which is what we're doing almost all the time in the real world anyway. So it kind of defeats the purpose, but they're not doing it consciously, so that can be forgiven. And the reason why I say you play it the second time is because that's when you get an opportunity, if you play another campaign where you make a new character, where you can branch out a little bit. So my first campaign, maybe in this paradigm, I just go into a world, make a character, and I'm a human bard who has a magical recording stone, and my only character tick is that every 3 to 5 days I stare into it and I vomit all of my thoughts and my reflections into it, and then I share it with people, right? That's basically just the iridescent goes into D&D, right? But the second time I get a little more adventurous, right? And maybe I'm a fucking daring paladin crusader, something like that. Anyways, it's an opportunity to step outside of yourself, and I think that is an important exercise that needs to be explored and expounded on in the world today more than ever. So, the reason I say that long-winded case for why to play the nerdiest game of all time, is because it is an avenue to explore and express heroic fantasies. And not just heroic fantasies in the slaying dragons and banging maidens and getting dope treasure and punching wizards in the dick. Not just that stuff. Fantasies inform so much of our lives. Humans are narrative creatures. We view ourselves through the lens of characters pursuing a goal, being beset by adversaries and complications and obstacles that come between us and our goals, and we are sort of defined by how we overcome them or fail to overcome them and where we are in relation to our goals. That is the ego-driven human psyche in a nutshell. If we're all narrative creatures and we all give ourselves a story to be the hero of, that in itself is a fantasy. Because as I've alluded to before, and as you probably know because you're an adult and these videos are not for children, I said that explicitly, YouTube, the world is more fucking complicated than that. It's not just about going to save the maiden. It's not just about training with the sword until you are the greatest master of arms this side of Westeros. It's none of that shit. You gotta go to school, you gotta get a job, it might not be jobs you like, you might not know what you're doing at school, you gotta get relationship with people who you think are great, and then, love dies, and you like coffee too much, you like drinking too much, you fucking get anxious about blah, blah, blah. There's nothing heroic about any of that bullshit milieu that we're all stuck in, right? So how do we get away from that? We create fantasies for ourselves so that we are not the mundane shit suckers that many of us actually are. Most of us are. None of us are special. And one route people go if they don't get to blow off steam in a game like Dungeons and Dragons is they create these particularly violent fantasies where they truly are the hero that's going to have to prove themselves, usually himself, in combat to protect those they love, that which they care about, that which they believe in, their property. They have to answer the call to arms quite literally. And of course, I'm talking about, frankly, a lot of MAGA heads. We saw this in Kenosha lately. Kyle Rittenhouse. I got nothing but bad things to say about that kid, and I'm not going to go ahead and say him on here because that would, get me canceled. By who? I don't know. I would probably just get too vulgar and nobody would want to watch me ever again. But that dude is a perfect example of a dude with a fantasy. I mean, he's 17. Like, he's still in the age where even more of your understanding of the world is informed by fantasies. I mean, he's a teenager. He's got no insight. He has no understanding of long-term consequences yet. But he participated in this combative, divisive narrative that is all over social media, all over traditional platforms of media, that is the American zeitgeist right now. He related to it, found himself on one side of it, and I'm talking about the police brutalizer, sympathizer side of it, right? Like, he's an authoritarian bootlicker fantasizer, right? And he said, all right, well, shit. Like, this is the fantasy. Like, the war is coming to the streets. The boogaloo is upon us or whatever. The libs really are coming for all our shit. So it's time for me to answer the call to arms. And the reason he's doing that is he's had this violent fantasy of having to do that this whole time. You've had conversations with real hardcore right-wingers, or are a hardcore right-winger, so probably have had conversations with right-wingers about sort of end times. You see that from evangelicals too. End times, a great reckoning, the storm, whatever. Some coming to a head, some violent conflict that's on its way. And it's blown up, it's romanticized, it's like it's a fucking shitty Michael Bay movie or something. He's got this violent fantasy, which he went, and because he holds it so near and dear to his heart and his sense of self, he goes and acts it out, and 2 people are killed, 1 is shot. And he was driven across state lines by his mom, who looks like a fucking ogre beast. I don't care. Fuck you. Drove her child across state lines with a assault rifle he illegally had. He was too young to possess in the state of Wisconsin. To go play Army Man, Knight Templar, defend a fucking gas station or some bullshit. Just so, and I mean, what he's building up to that whole time is the opportunity to fucking pop a cap in one of the constitutionally affirmed protesters' asses. He wanted to shoot somebody. That's why he was going there. That is what the fantasy leads up to, right? That is the consequence of not having an outlet for a type of fantasy, right? And like I said earlier, we all have fantasies because it gives us a place, it gives us orientation in the flow of the story of our lives, right? And if yours is violent, those can be some of the consequences, especially considering how many of us there are. One of them with that violent fantasy is bound to have it blow up that way, is bound to have it manifest in that form. Violence manifesting as violence. Violent thoughts begetting violence in the real world, right? It tracks, don't you think? Now, violent fantasies and the presence of them have an impact on other people. They make people afraid. I'm afraid. I've had conversations with people, like-minded people, about whether or not it feels like the right time to buy a gun, right? I would never buy a gun. I hate guns. I've never even shot a gun. I don't want to shoot a gun. I am ideologically opposed to them. I've never been hunting. I've never been in the shooting range. I played a little paintball as a kid, but I can't get into gun porn, and I'm not into guns. And I'm preoccupied with the evils that come with them. I'm too preoccupied to get into them in any shape or form. And yet, I'm so afraid of these violent fantasizers taking it there that I think, shit, I want to be able to defend myself, right? And I'm not going to get a gun. But I know some people who are very strongly considering it who never would have either. And that's because their fantasies now are being shaped by fear. Not this urge for violence, but this fear of the threat of violence. And it goes hand in hand. You know, those violent fantasies come from the fear that, way of life is being snuffed out by racial equality, which is fucking stupid, but fantasies are not rational inherently. And, fear of that fear becoming violence shapes people like me's point of view, right? And I'll give you a physical example of this, or a historical example, an anecdotal example, something that happened to me recently. So I was at a lake in eastern Washington at a cabin with some of my friends. And I really liked going out there. And it was a great time. And ultimately, this didn't end up ruining anything. It just caused a couple minutes that got me reflecting. Okay, so for those of you who aren't from Washington or aren't familiar with the sort of geopolitics of it, a lot of people think of Washington as like a deep blue, like super liberal communist state, because that's what they think of in Seattle, because it's all hipster and grunge and queer friendly and progressive and all that. That is true of that area, but if you go east over the mountains, eastern Washington, the people live further apart. There's more agriculture. There's only one big city, and it's not an urban sprawl like the Bay Area or Los Angeles. So it's quite conservative. Anyways, we go out there. We're on this lake, and we're staying in a little kind of cabin thing, and maybe like not that far away, maybe like 20, 30 yards away is the neighbor's cabin, and they're also on the lake. And I've been out there before, and we know of the neighbor, and he's a nice guy, kind of quiet, but he wasn't there this time, and he had his buddy staying there to vacation. It's a nice spot. It's the lake. And this dude was about my age, right? So probably mid-20s, maybe late 20s. And he was a white dude. He was had a camo bent bill hat with a fish hook on it and that kind of like stylized American flag logo. Tactical sunglasses, just, lots of camo gear and stuff. Real outdoorsy guy, right? But in my fantasy view of the world, he's fitting a bill, right? You can infer what you want, but I'm like most people, I'm stereotyping this person immediately when I see them. And he's a nice enough guy. He's a little socially awkward. It's kind of weird. But anyways, weekend goes on. We have a couple interactions with him. We don't really like jive super tough, but we can tell he's a nice guy. And then on like the third day we're there, we're all out on the dock fishing, and he's maybe like 30 yards behind us on his porch, and he's decided to bring out his guns. He's a veteran, by the way. At some point we learned that he's a veteran. Might have been wearing a shirt. He was talking to some of my friends, but he brings out a bunch of guns. He's got a handgun, an AR, a shotgun, and a long rifle, I guess a hunting rifle. It looked like what I think of as a fucking sniper rifle, but like I said, I'm not a gun guy, so maybe it's not technically a sniper rifle. It looks like you could snipe someone with it, though. He takes them all out, and we turn around, and, some of us see that, and we see he's got guns draped all over him. He's got guns laid out, and the consensus among most of us is like, shit, that makes me pretty uncomfortable. And what's more is he's field stripping them. He's taking them apart. He's cleaning them. He's emptying the clip and like fake firing a bunch. Just like doing a lot of shit with guns, right? And there are a contingent of us who come from like very like liberal areas, not gun culture, who are pretty like unsettled by this. And I've talked to my buddy whose cabin it is, and he's from Eastern Washington, and a couple other people in there. They're not that bothered by it. They think it's there because they grow up in areas where that is a normal thing to be doing. My other buddy who's gonna join the Marines says, "Oh, that's a pretty normal thing for veterans to do. It's familiar, it's routine, it's meditative." And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's cool. I appreciate meditation. I appreciate things that calm me down. So he has every right to be doing that, and it's not illegal, so that's okay. But man, do I feel uncomfortable. And I feel uncomfortable because those are fucking guns. And if that dude just had a neural misfire or some level of resentment that we weren't aware he had, he is very much capable of just taking one of those guns and going, and that's my fearful fantasy. Because he wasn't going to do that. He's a nice guy. But my case here is that living in a gun culture is absurd. Because even if those fearful fantasies of mine and some of those other people are completely unwarranted, and he truly is the immaculate, responsible gun owner that a lot of people on the right really adore, the fact remains that he's not out there polishing his marble collection. He's not building a fucking sailboat in a bottle. He's working on things that are meant to kill people. An assault rifle is not meant to kill elk. A shotgun, well, I guess you can hunt with a shotgun, but my point is, those things are ready-made to fucking kill people. And he's cleaning them, and he has them. And I feel well within my rights to feel that fear that my fantasy is pumping into my bloodstream. And it feels logical. It feels rational to be afraid. So, personally, I just think nobody needs fucking guns. We could just do away with them. We've got other cooler things to be doing. But if you are absolutely dead set on the necessity for us to have the right to bear arms or whatever antiquated bullshit you want to talk about, maybe we don't need to get rid of the guns, but goddamn it, at the very least, we got to do something to instill confidence in people like me with the fearful fantasy that they're not as dangerous as they seem. And that seems like a pretty tall order. I'll make a brief announcement about sports. The bubble's been amazing. I just watched a couple incredible Game 7s. The Nuggets versus the Jazz and the Thunder versus the Rockets. The NBA is now by far and away my favorite sports league, and I've decided it's unacceptable that I don't have a team. I had a crisis of faith when Russell Westbrook left the Thunder. I wasn't sure if I was a fan of the player or a fan of the uniform. I still like Russell Westbrook a lot. It was really hard watching him beat the Thunder, and I never thought I'd be rooting for Chris Paul because I've always thought Chris Paul's extra and annoying. But after watching that game, I've officially decided that I'm a Thunder fan. So, roll fucking Thunder. Lou Dort, Darius Baisley, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I'm excited about the young core of that team, and I'm going to be a Thunder fan all the way going forward. Except for this playoffs. I want to see the Rockets go as far as they can because, Russell, you're still my boy. All right. Well, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you can relate. I'd love you to share. We're on the quest of 50 subscribers now. We hit 40. Step by step, baby. We're going to do this together. So, Parker Brisebois, you've been watching the Iridescent, signing out. Peace!